Welcome back, listener. If the rain or fire sound is playing and the screen is dark, you're in the right place. Let your thoughts quiet down. This story will keep watch while you rest. Tell me in the comments, what time is it for you right now? And are you listening with the lights on or off? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. The room smelled of bleach and something sour hidden underneath. Mark Henderson pressed his cheek against the cold window, trying to see past the rain that had turned the parking lot into a smear of red neon. The glass vibrated with each gust of wind. He'd been here for 3 hours, and the day manager still hadn't shown up with his deposit refund. The sign outside flickered desert view. Moat land. One of the letters had been dead for years. He could taste rust on his tongue. Behind him, the bed creaked, though he knew the mattress was empty. He checked under it. He checked the closet. He triple-checked the door locks. But the sensation of being watched had only grown sharper since he pulled into the lot at dusk. A low hum from the air conditioner rattled the cheap wall unit, and every few seconds it cut out, leaving a silence so thick he could hear his own pulse. He didn't want to turn around, but something in the reflection of the glass shifted a shadow that didn't belong to him. Mark finally looked away from the window and forced himself to face the room. It was a standard cheap motel setup. One double bed with a faded floral coverlet, a laminate desk with a dead lamp, a television from the early 2000s bolted to a dresser, but the note on the bathroom mirror had stopped him cold when he first checked in, written in blue ink on a torn piece of motel stationery. Do not sleep in bed 7. It will take you. He laughed it off as a prank from a previous guest. Now, after the flickering lights, the inexplicable chill near the closet, and the way the rain had started exactly when he stepped inside, he wasn't laughing. He had booked room 7 because it was the cheapest available. The desk clerk, a gaunt woman with a lazy eye hat, slid the key across the counter without a word. Her gaze fixed somewhere over his shoulder. Shed mumbled something about keeping the curtains closed. Mark thought she was just creepy. Now he wondered if she was trying to warn him. His phone had no signal. The landline on the nightstand was dead, and the rain wasn't letting up. To understand how Mark ended up in that room, you have to go back 2 days. He was driving north from Phoenix toward Los Angeles. A freelance photographer trying to fill a commission on abandoned roadside architecture. The assignment was for a niche magazine that paid barely enough to cover gas. But Mark liked the solitude of the road. He was 34, divorced, and carrying a restlessness that had cost him his marriage. His ex-wife had called it the inability to stay still. Mark called it curiosity. It was that same curiosity that made him veer off Interstate 15 at an exit near Barstow, California, when he saw a wooden sign advertising Route 66 Motel. Historic, clean rooms. The sign was faded, half erased by decades of sun. But the word historic hooked him. He de-photograph it, spend one night, and move on. The gas station where he stopped for fuel was a relic itself to pumps, and a convenience store that smelled of old fry oil. The attendant, an old man with leathery skin, watched him with an expression Mark couldn't read. "You heading to the Starlight?" the man asked. Mark shook his head. "Desert View Motel, I think." Off the old highway. The man's face tightened. "That place closed down years ago." "You sure?" Mark checked his phone. The address showed open 24 hours. "Maybe reopened," Mark said. The attendant said nothing else, just rang up his gas and handed back change without meeting his eyes. Mark found the motel 30 minutes later, just as the sun was beginning to drop behind the mountains. The Desert View Motel sat at the end of a pitted access road that seemed to lead nowhere. The building was a single-story L-shaped structure, painted a faded peach that had bleached to bone in places. The pool was empty, its concrete cracked, filled with wind-blown sand. A sign above the office door said vacancy, but the neon tube behind it was dark. For a moment, Mark considered turning around. The place had a depression to it, a weight in the air that made his skin prickle, but his tank was low. The next town was 50 miles away, and his curiosity had already clicked into gear. He parked, grabbed his camera bag, and walked to the office. Inside, a bell on the door announced his arrival. The woman behind the counter looked up from a small TV playing static. Her name tag read Gloria. She had a lazy eye that drifted to the left, and she spoke in a monotone that made every sentence sound like a warning. "Room 7 is the only one clean," she said. 50 cash. No card, no deposit. Mark handed over the cash. She slid the key across the counter-ray brass key attached to a plastic diamond. "Checkout is 11, she said. "Don't answer the door if someone knocks after midnight." Mark smiled, assuming a joke. Her face didn't change. He took the key and walked to room 7. The door number painted in flaking black letters. The lock was stiff. The window curtains were drawn. He didn't see the note on the bathroom mirror until he'd already unpacked. The first hour in room 7 was uneventful. Mark took photographs of the room's dated Dacre, the chipped bathroom tile, the faded mural of a desert sunset above the bed. He tried the television static. The air conditioner coughed out lukewarm air. He checked his phone again. Still no signal. He decided to walk the perimeter of the motel, hoping to find a better vantage for a landscape shot. Outside, the rain hadn't started yet, but the sky was the color of a bruise. The parking lot held only his car and a rusted sedan near the office. Every other room had its curtains drawn. He circled the building and found a back alley lined with overflowing dumpsters. That's where he saw the diary. It was wedged between a dumpster and the wall, its pages swollen from moisture. A spiral notebook, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store. On the cover, written in the same blue ink as the note on his mirror, were the words, "Room 7, do not remove." Mark picked it up. He shouldn't have, but curiosity was his flaw, and it had already failed him in one marriage. He took the diary back to his room and opened it on the bed. The first entry was dated 3 months earlier. Day 1. The manager says, "I can stay as long as I pay. She's the only one here. I haven't seen another guest. The phone works only sometimes. I hear scratching in the walls at night. I think it's rats. I hope it's rats." Mark read through the diary as the sun set outside. The writer was a woman named Sylvie. According to later entries, she had checked into the Desert View Motel after a breakdown on the highway, planning to stay one night. She stayed 2 weeks. The entries grew more fragmented. Day 4. I saw a man in the parking lot at 3 a.m. He was standing perfectly still, staring at my window. I called the office. Gloria said, "There's no one else on the property." I locked the door. The deadbolt won't engage properly. Mark checked his own deadbolt. It was loose-eth screws. Holding the strike plate had been stripped, leaving the lock useless. He felt a cold thread pull through his chest. Day 7. I haven't slept in 3 days. Every time I close my eyes, I feel hands on my ankles, pulling me down through the mattress. I tore the sheets off. The bed is solid, but the feeling won't stop. I put a chair in the bed to weigh it down. Mark looked at his own bed. It was a standard box spring and mattress. No visible damage, but the mattress cover had a faint stain in the middle, darker than the rest. He reached out and touched it. The fabric was cold, damp. He jerked his hand back. The diary continued. Day 10. I saw him again. He was inside my room, standing in the corner where the closet is. I screamed and he disappeared. Gloria told me not to worry, that the previous occupant often lingers. She said it like it was normal. I asked her who died in this room. She said no one died. She said they were taken. Mark stopped reading. The air in the room had changed. It felt thicker, heavier, as if the oxygen had been replaced with something dense. He looked at the closet door. It was slightly ajar, didn't remember leaving it that way. He checked the closet when he first arrived. It was empty, except for a few wire hangers. Now the gap between door and frame was just wide enough to see blackness inside, not the darkness of an empty space, but something that seemed to absorb the light from the room. Mark stood up slowly. He debated whether to close the door or open it. Curiosity told him to open it. Survival told him to leave. He compromised by staying where he was, feet planted on the gritty carpet. The diary fell from his hands, landing open on the floor. He heard a sound from the closet, a soft exhale, like someone letting out a long-held breath. It was not his own. The air conditioner rattled to life, and the sound was swallowed by white noise. Mark took a step backward toward the door. Then he stopped. He needed to see. He walked to the closet and yanked the door open in one motion. The interior was empty, but the back wall had writing on it, scratched into the plaster with something sharp, not words, a grid of tally marks, hundreds of them. Some were crossed out. In the center of the grid, written in a shaky hand, was a single sentence. Bed 7. It takes you when you sleep. Mark's breath caught. He counted the tally marks quickly, at least 200, maybe more. Each one represented something. A night, a person. The crossed out marks were clustered near the edges, as if someone had tried to cancel them out. He pulled out his phone again, hoping to take a picture. The camera app opened, but the image on the screen was wrong. The closet wall looked different through the lens. The tally marks were gone, replaced by a smooth, clean surface. He lowered the phone. The scratches were still there in person. He lifted the phone again. Something was actively hiding the evidence from the camera. The realization made his stomach turn. He backed away from the closet, leaving the door open because he didn't want to turn his back to it. The diary lay on the floor. He picked it up, flipping to the last entry. Day 14. I am writing this in the bathroom. The mirror shows things that aren't there. I saw my own reflection smile at me while my face was still. I tried to leave today. My car wouldn't start. Gloria said the road is closed. I am trapped. I am going to try to stay awake. If you find this, don't sleep in room 7. Don't sleep on the bed. It will take you. It took the others. Tell someone. Tell anyone. The motel is hungry. The entry ended there, mid-sentence. The next pages were blank, stained with something brown and crusted. Mark closed the diary. His hands were shaking. He looked at the bed, the queen-sized bed, with its floral coverlet, its suspicious stain. its sagging mattress. He swore he saw the blanket indent slightly, as if someone had just shifted their weight. Then the bedside lamp flickered once, twice, and went out. The darkness was absolute for 3 long seconds. Mark fumbled for the lamp switch, clicking it on and off. The red glow from the outdoor vacancy sign seeped through the curtains, painting the room in a bloody hue. He could see the outline of the bed, the darker rectangle of the closet door. His own shadow stretched long across the floor. He decided he could not stay in this room. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, the diary, and headed for the door. The deadbolt turned with a scrape, and the knob twisted freely, but the door didn't open. He pushed. It budged a centimeter, then stopped, as if something on the other side was pressing back. He shoved his shoulder into it. The door groaned, but held firm. A faint sound came from the other side, a slow, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging down the wood. Mark pressed his ear to the crack. The breathing he heard was not his own. It was slow, deep, coming from something much larger than a person. And it was right on the other side of the door, waiting. He backed away. The deadbolt had been unlocked. Whoever or whatever was outside wanted him to know that it had control. The scraping stopped. Then a voice, low and raspy, barely audible through the wood. "You didn't read the note." Mark didn't answer. He was frozen, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear. The voice continued, "Bed 7. It knows you're here. It's already started. Don't close your eyes. Not even for a second." Then the scraping moved away, dragging across the concrete walkway, fading into the sound of rain. Mark waited until his breathing steadied. He peered through the curtain, positioning himself so he could see the parking lot without being seen. The rain had thinned to a drizzle. The red neon from the beam of my maglite sliced through the fog like a blade through wet wool. It'd been following that light for nearly 20 minutas, a faint amber glow that flickered between the lodgepole pines. Always just ahead. My radio had been silent for the last hour. Ever since id crossed the boundary of the backcountry permit zone near the thoroughfare trail. My name is Marcus Webb, and at 34, I'd been a Yellowstone ranger for 8 years. I knew this park better than most people know their own kitchen. That's what made this wrong. The figure didn't move when my light hit them. Just stood there, back to me, wearing a blue jacket I recognized from a missing person flyer taped to the ranger station bulletin board 3 days ago. The name on that flyer was Emily Porter, 22. Last seen hiking the Shoshone Lake Trail. Her jacket was the same shade of navy. My breath fogged in front of my face. I called out her name. The figure didn't turn. Instead, the amber glow I'd been chasing winked out, and the forest went dark. I found the boot first, half buried in the duff beneath a fallen log. It was a women's size 7. Merrill brand exactly. What Emily Porter had been wearing according to the report filed by her sister. The laces were still tied in a neat double bow. No one takes off a boot in the middle of the backcountry and leaves it perfectly knotted. I swept my light in a slow arc. No other gear, no pack, no water bottle, no sign of a struggle except the deep footprint impressions leading away from the boot knot human footprints. They were elongated, almost canine, but the stride was impossibly wide. I radioed dispatch. The canyon walls had a way of eating signals, especially after midnight. I was 2 miles from the nearest patrol cabin, and the temperature was dropping below freezing. Every ranger learns the protocols for a missing person. Secure the... Let me back up to how I got here. It'd been on night dispatch rotation for 2 weeks. Desk duty after a back injury from a fall in the Gallatin Range. The boredom was grinding. I spent hours scanning trailhead logs, listening to static, and reading old case files. Emily Porter's file had landed on my desk late Tuesday afternoon. Her sister, Lauren, had driven from Bozeman in a panic. Emily had gone on a solo overnight hike, planned to return Sunday. It was now Wednesday. No cell signal, no check-in, no emergency beacon activation. I'd read the file 3 times. Emily was an experienced hiker. Shed summited Half Dome, done the Wonderland Trail, worked as a wilderness guide in Alaska. She wasn't the type to get lost, but the details nagged at me. The last ping from her phone was near the Grant Village area. Then nothing. That was 48 hours ago. I'd decided to run a preliminary search myself, off the books, while the official team prepped for a dawn launch. I told myself it was efficiency. In truth, I wanted the credit. I wanted to be the one who brought her home. My supervisor, Gary, warned me not to go alone. I told him I'd just scout the road access points. I lied. I left the station at dusk, driving the patrol truck to the trailhead at Shoshone Lake. The parking lot was empty, no cars, no other hikers. I signed the logbook at the trail register, noting that no one had checked in since Sunday morning. That was Emily's entry. Her handwriting was neat, almost mechanical. Emily Porter, solo, overnight, checking out Monday. But Shed never checked out. The register also had a second entry, several pages earlier, that I almost missed. A single line in smudged pencil, dated 6 days before her arrival. Don't follow the lights. No name. I photographed it with my phone, but the reception was already fading. I started hiking at a brisk pace. my pack loaded with emergency gear, extra water, and a first aid kit. The trail was familiar. Id patrolled this corridor dozens of times. As the sun sank behind the Madison Plateau, the temperature dropped sharply. I passed the remnants of an old campsite Eckhart stones, a torn tarp. Everything felt off, like the forest had rearranged itself. I checked my GPS. It showed me at the correct coordinates, but the trail ahead was overgrown with ferns that shouldn't have been there in late September. I pushed forward anyway. By 10 p.m., Id covered 6 miles without finding any sign of Emelino footprint. No discarded wrapper. No human trace. Then I stumbled into a clearing that made my skin tighten. It was a perfect circle, about 30 feet in diameter, ringed by stones that looked deliberately placed. In the center, a fire pit held the remains of a recent blaze. Gray ash, a few chunks of unburned wood, and something else. I knelt and shone my light into the ash. Bone fragments, small tubular, cracked open. I identified them as phalanges finger bones. I sat back on my heels, my heart hammering. Id attended enough wilderness forensics training to know that human remains don't burn completely in a campfire, especially not the small bones of the hand. Someone had tried to dispose of evidence. I swept my light around the circle's edge. More tracks, those elongated. Canine-like impression surrounded the fire, overlapping in a pattern that suggested circling. I counted at least 5 distinct sets. I pulled my radio again. Static, but this time weaker, as if something was absorbing the signal. I was alone, miles from backup, and the night had gone dead quiet. No wind, no owls, no insect. The silence itself became a presence. I should have turned back. Every rational part of my brain screamed retreat, but the overconfidence Id cultivated over 8 years' belief that I could handle anything this park threw at me kept my feet moving. I followed the tracks away from the clearing, deeper into a stand of whitebark pines. The forest floor was soft with fallen needles, muffling my footsteps. My flashlight beam danced across the trunks, and that's when I saw it. A shape above, maybe 20 feet up, caught in the crook of a massive branch. At first, I thought it was a deer carcass, maybe an elk that had been dragged up by a mountain lion. But the shape was wrong. Too straight, too long. I raised my light slowly. What I saw will stay etched in my memory until I die. A human body, strapped upright to the tree, trunk with strips of what looked like sinew. The clothing was torn, but I recognized the blue jacket from the flyer. The face was turned away, but the hair matched Emily's long, dark, tangled. I couldn't tell if she was alive. There was no movement, no sound. I dropped my pack and scrambled up the trunk, my climbing boots finding purchase on the rough bark. When I reached the branch, I saw that the sinew straps weren't just holding Herthy, were woven into the flesh itself, threaded through small cuts in the skin like stitching. I gagged. I reached for my knife to cut her down. The knife slipped from my hand. I watched it fall, blade catching the faint amber light that had reappeared below the same light I'd been chasing earlier. It was now pooling beneath the tree like liquid fire, casting long, shifting shadows. I held my breath. The light was not natural. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It seemed to come from the ground itself, seeping through cracks in the soil. I froze on the branch, one hand gripping the trunk, the other inches from Emily's bound wrist. Her body rocked slightly, as if stirred by a breeze I couldn't feel. Then I heard a voice, not from her, from below, a low, guttural whisper, shaped around words I didn't recognize. It came from directly under the tree, from the glow. I looked down and saw a shape moving within the light long, sinuous, low to the ground. The tracks, the canine footprints, whatever made them was here, watching me. I had two choices: climb higher and hope it couldn't follow, or drop to the ground and fight. I chose neither. My hand moved on its own, reaching for Emily's cheek to turn her face toward me. I needed to see if she was alive. Her skin was cold, her head turned, and the light from below illuminated her features. Her eyes were open. They were not human. They were the same amber as the glow, and they stared straight through me. I jerked back so hard, I nearly lost my grip on the branch. The woman, Emily, didn't blink. Her jaw unhinged slightly, and a sound escaped her throat. Not a word, not a scream, but a clicking like stones struck together. The amber light from below flared, and I saw her teeth. They had been filed into points, each one sharpened to a needle tip. The sinew straps holding her to the tree began to pulse, tightening and loosening as if alive. I scrambled down the trunk, abandoning my knife, my pack, everything. I hit the ground running, but the light followed me, pooling ahead, cutting off my path. I veered left, then right, but every direction I turned, the amber glow was already there, waiting. The whispering grew louder, layered, multiple voices now, all speaking in that same unrecognizable language. I tripped over a root and fell, my flashlight spinning away and winking out. I lay on the forest floor, the glow inches from my face, and I could see the source now. The ground was seeping a viscous, honey-colored fluid, bubbling up through the pine needles. It smelled of ozone and rotting meat. I pressed my palms into the earth, pushing myself up, and that That's when I felt ETA vibration, deep and regular, like a massive engine running far below the park. Yellowstone sits on a supervolcano. I knew that, but this was not geothermal. This was something older, something that had been asleep until something woke it. I ran for what felt like hours. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every trail I recognized led to a dead end or a thickening wall of brush. The amber glow never stopped pursuing, but it never overtook me either. It was hurting me, pushing me in a specific direction. I could feel it in my bones. My lungs burned. My legs ached. I stopped at the edge of a ravine I knew, the one that fed into the Yellowstone River near the thoroughfare. Below, the water rushed black and cold. I could hear the whispering again, now behind me, now ahead, now from inside my own head. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The voice took on a shape, a name. It called me by my full name, Marcus Allen Webb. It knew me. It told me I had been walking the park for 8 years, and in all that time, I had never noticed the places where the ground was thin. It told me that Emily was not the first. It told me that the park was a membrane, and that what lay beneath was hungry. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, covered in dirt and scratches. I noticed something else. My reflection in a shallow puddle at my feet. My eyes were not my own. They were beginning to glow, faintly amber. I wiped at my eyes, thinking it was mud or sweat reflecting the glow behind me. But the light was gone. The forest had gone silent again, and the amber had vanished. I was alone in the dark, my headlamp dead, my radio broken from the fall. My eyes still felt wrong, a pressure behind the sockets, a warmth that shouldn't be there. I stumbled to the riverbank and scooped water to wash my face. The cold did nothing to dim the sensation. I looked at my reflection in the flowing current. The glow was stronger now, a pale gold ring around my iris. I saw it flicker like a candle flame. I thought about the bone fragments in the clearing. I thought about the sinew stitching, the filed teeth, the whispering voice that knew my name. I thought about the missing persons reports Id filed over the Yershikers, campers. Even a few ranger saw vanished in this section of the park. The statistics were always blamed on bears. Accidents, exposure. But the numbers never added up. I had always accepted the official explanations. I was good at accepting things. That was part of my flaw. I trusted my training, my experience, the systems in place. I didn't question what I was told. And now I was looking at my own changing eyes, and I knew that the system had never accounted for what was actually happening. I had to get back to the station. I had to warn them, but a part of me, growing louder, whispered that it was too late. The trail back felt longer than it should have been. I checked my watch for 17 a.m. I should have been at the trailhead within an hour. But I'd been walking for 2 hours, and the terrain was unfamiliar. The lodgepole pines had given way to a strange grove of trees I didn't recognize, their bark smooth and gray, their leaves curled inward like closed fists. The ground beneath was carpeted with The GPS had been silent for the last 12 miles. Maya pressed the accelerator, but the sedan only shuddered in response. The headlights cut a weak cone into the thick birch and pine of the Adirondack forest, shed past the last town, Long Lake proper, nearly 40 minutes ago. Now the road was a single lane of cracked asphalt, and the rain had started again, cold needles against the windshield. The engine coughed. She saw the red tail lights of her rented house, perhaps through the trees. No, the listing said it was secluded. The car died completely. In the sudden silence, she heard her own breathing, and then the sound of footsteps on gravel. She squinted into the darkness beyond the hood. A figure stood there, unmoving, half illuminated by the failing dashboard light. It held no umbrella, no flashlight, just stood waiting. The figure didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Maya reached for her phone, but the battery was at 3%. Then the person stepped forward, and the porch light behind them flickered on, revealing a woman in her late 60s, wearing a yellow raincoat that looked too new for the weather. Maya, the woman said, not a question but a statement. The car always gives out on this last stretch. I told them to fix the road. Come inside. It was the host, Iris. Maya had only spoken to her through the Airbnb messaging system. Her voice was calm, almost maternal, but her eyes stayed fixed on Maya's face with an intensity that made the rain feel colder. Maya grabbed her bag and stepped out. The air smelled of wet earth and something metallic, like coins left in the rain. The cabin loomed ahead, windows dark, except for one single lamp on the porch. Maya had booked this trip 3 weeks ago, after the fight with Tom. He said she was too distant, too caught up in her work as a freelance graphic designer. She said he didn't understand that deadlines didn't pause for relationship talks. The real reason she chose this cabin nestled deep in the woods near Tupper Lake. New York was its advertised lack of Wi-Fi and cell service. A digital detox, she told herself. A chance to think without notifications buzzing in her pocket. She unpacked her bag slowly, hanging a single dress in the closet, placing her toiletries on the bathroom sink. The cabin was clean, decorated with rustic antlers and hand-knitted blankets. Too clean. It looked like no one had ever stayed here. The guest book on the nightstand was blank, its pages pristine. She checked the date on her phone. 3% battery. She plugged it in, but the charger didn't fit the old outlet. The next morning, Maya woke to the sound of rain still falling. She made coffee in the percolator Iris had left on the counter grounds already measured. As if Shed known exactly when Maya would arrive, she found the Polaroid camera on a shelf in the living room, an antique, heavy and silver. Next to it lay a single photograph, face down. She turned it over. The image showed 3 children standing in a field, arms around each other, smiling. The photo was faded, the colors leaching into yellow and white. One of the children wore a red shirt that stood out like a wound. Maya felt her stomach tighten. She recognized the shirt. Shed had one exactly like it when she was 8. She told herself it was a coincidence, a common brand. But the longer she stared, the more the face of the girl in the middle looked familiar. She put the photo back, face down, and poured her coffee with shaking hands. Maya tried to call Tom, but there was no signal. She tried the landline on the kitchen wall dead. She didn't panic. Not yet. She told herself this was the point of the trip. Isolation, quiet, a break from the constant noise of her life. She opened the fridge, stocked with fresh vegetables, eggs, milk. A note in tidy handwriting sat on the top shelf. Help yourself. I live next door if you need anything. Next door. Maya hadn't seen another house for miles last night. She stepped onto the porch. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The forest was dense, the trees old and bent with moss. She couldn't see any other roof through the canopy, but she could swear she saw a movement between the trunks. A flash of yellow, a raincoat. She blinked and it was gone. She went back inside and locked the door. That afternoon, Maya found a door under the stairs. It was small, child-sized, and padlocked. She knelt and ran her fingers over the lock. It looked old, the metal crusted with rust, the kind of lock that hadn't been opened in years. But the basement door beside it was open, and she descended out of curiosity. The air down here was cold and damp, smelling of soil and something sour. The floor was packed dirt. One bare bulb swung from the ceiling, casting long, shifting shadows. She saw boxes stacked against the wall, labeled in black marker with dates. She pulled one open. Inside were newspaper clippings, all stained yellow. Every single headline was the same story, repeated in different papers from different decades. Local boy missing from school playground. Jake Milbrook, age 7, vanishes without a trace. Maya read the first clipping with her heart hammering against her ribs. The boy was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He disappeared on September 12, 1987. She knew Lancaster. She grew up in a suburb of Harrisburg, only an hour away. But that wasn't what made her hands shake. It was the photograph. The missing boy had the same round face, the same cowlick above his left eyebrow. As a boy, she remembered from kindergarten. She couldn't recall his name, but she remembered his laugh, his tendency to cry when he scraped his knee, and she remembered the last day she saw him, the day he told her he was moving. She had waved goodbye to him from her front porch, but according to the clipping, he never moved. He was taken from the playground that same afternoon. She put the clipping back and climbed the stairs with her legs feeling like jelly. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the Polaroid photograph she'd found. The girl in the middle, the red shirt. Maya pulled up her own childhood photos in her memory, but they were hazy, like photographs left in the sun too long. Her mother had moved them to a nursing home outside Philadelphia 3 years ago. The memories of her early life felt thin, as if someone had ripped pages from a book and left only the faint outline of the binding. She remembered her mother's face, her father's voice, the wallpaper in her bedroom, but the face of the missing boy Jakesh couldn't place it. She felt like she was trying to recall a dream that had already evaporated. At 3 a.m., she heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, then silence. She didn't get up to look. Morning came gray and quiet. Maya opened the front door. On the welcome mat sat a cassette tape, an old-fashioned audio cassette in a clear plastic case. No note. She picked it up, and the plastic was cold, damp with morning dew. She turned it over. On one side, written in blue ink, was a single word: play. Her mind went to the tape deck in the living room, an old stereo system from the 90s. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave, to walk into the woods and follow the road back to town. But her car was still dead, and she couldn't remember the way. She slid the tape into the deck and pressed play. The recording was static at first, then a voice, a child's voice, singing a nursery rhyme she recognized from her own childhood. Ring around the rosy pocket full of posies. The voice was small, frightened, and it was asking Maya, "Can you hear me? Please answer." The tape ended. She rewound it and played it again. The same thing. Think about this if you found a recording of your own childhood being sung by a voice you almost recognized. Would you stay to find out who left it? Or would you run into the photograph had been sitting on the nightstand when Nora arrived. She assumed the realtor left it as some kind of decorative touch. An old black and white of the house from maybe 70 years ago. But now, holding it under the weak light, filtering through the dusty window. She noticed something wrong. The photograph wasn't static. The shadows in the image seemed to shift when she tilted the paper, like oil on water, slow and deliberate. She blinked, convinced it was an optical illusion, a trick of the failing afternoon sun. But when she looked again, the front porch in the photograph was empty. She knew for a fact that in the original image, a woman had been standing there. Nora had seen her clearly the first time she picked it up. Now the porch was vacant. She set the photo down on the nightstand, face down. The wood of the floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and she felt the temperature in the room drop by several degrees. The house had been empty for 30 years before she signed the lease. The second thing Nora noticed was the smell. Not the usual must of an abandoned house, but something earthier, deeper, like wet soil and crushed leaves. It clung to the walls, seeped from the baseboards. Shed been in Bennington, Vermont, for less than 4 hours, and already she regretted the decision. The estate agent had been honest about the property's multiple owners, all of them short-term, all of them leaving without explanation. But Nora needed cheap rent, and this place was practically free. She had moved here from Burlington after the divorce, hoping distance would reset something in her brain. She was 31, a freelance graphic designer, and her one personality flaw was that she never knew when to walk away. She'd stay in bad relationships too long, keep fixing broken appliances. And now she was standing in a decaying Victorian house at the edge of the Green Mountains, convincing herself the smell was just old wood and neglect. She took a sip of water from the tap. It tasted metallic, like coins dissolving on her tongue. The house had 3 floors, 7 bedrooms, and a basement that the realtor had specifically advised her not to enter. Just keep the door locked, Shed said with a practiced smile. It's flooded down there. Mold issues. Nora had nodded, made a mental note to buy a dehumidifier, and signed the 12-month lease without reading the fine print. Now dragging a box of kitchen supplies up the narrow staircase, she realized the hallway wallpaper was printed with a pattern of small, repeating flowers. Up close, the flowers weren't flowers at all. They were faces, tiny, stylized, almost hidden in the floral design. She traced one with her finger and felt the paper crumble slightly. Beneath it, the wall was dark, stained with something that had soaked deep into the plaster. She pulled her hand back. The smell was stronger up here. She unpacked her grandmother's ceramic rooster, placed it on the kitchen counter, and told herself this was just an old house with old house problems. Settling in would take time. That's all this was. She just needed time. The first night, Nora slept badly. She woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of something dragging across the floor above her. Not footsteps, not movement from an animal, but a slow, heavy scrape, like furniture being pulled across a carpeted room. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, watching a crack run from the light fixture to the corner. The scraping continued for 12 seconds, then stopped. The house settled. She closed her eyes, counted backwards from 100. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt pressed against her ears, a physical weight. At some point, she drifted off, and when she woke to pale dawn light filtering through the bare window, her throat was dry and her hands were sore. She looked down. Her fingernails were caked with dark dirt, the kind that comes from deep underground. She had no memory of going outside. She stumbled to the bathroom and scrubbed her hands until the water ran pink. The drain gurgled, and for a moment she could have sworn she heard a voice, muffled and far away, coming up through the pipes. She turned the faucet off. The house went quiet again. On the third day, Nora started exploring. She told herself it was practical. She needed to know where the fuse box was, check for leaks, assess the overall condition of the property. But really, she was searching for the source of the smell. It had grown stronger, more specific, like the air in a greenhouse mixed with something rotting. She opened the closet in the master bedroom and found shelves lined with porcelain dolls. There were at least 30 of them, arranged in neat rows, all facing the door. Their painted eyes were uniformly dark, almost black, and their clothes were old, hand-stitched from fabric that had faded to gray. Nora reached for one and stopped. The doll in the front row had its head turned slightly to the left. She looked at the others. They were all facing straight ahead, all identical in their frozen stares. But this one was different. She pulled her hand back and closed the closet door. The smell was worse now, almost suffocating. She pressed her sleeve to her nose and walked out of the room. Behind her, she heard the closet door creak open again. She did not turn around. Nora drove into Bennington proper that afternoon and spent 2 hours at the public library. The librarian, a woman named Carol with silver hair and kind eyes, helped her locate microfilm records from the 1950s through the 1970s. Nora searched for any mention of 1428 Bennington Road. She found 3 articles. The first, from 1958, described the disappearance of a young mother named Alina Weiss. She had been living in the house with her husband and 2 children. One morning, she walked into the garden and never came back. A search party found her shoes at the edge of the woods, arranged neatly side by side. The second article from 1967 reported the death of a man named Arthur Pine. He had been the caretaker for the property. His body was found in the basement, though the coroner's report noted no visible cause of death. The third article was dated 1992. A family of 4 had moved into the house and left within 6 months. The father was hospitalized with severe dehydration and malnutrition, though he insisted he had been eating and drinking normally. He claimed the house fed him something else at night, something that looked like food but wasn't. Nora photocopied all 3 articles and folded them into her bag. Back at the house, the sun was beginning to set. Nora walked to the back garden, where the grass had grown wild and knee-high. Beyond the property line, the forest stretched into the foothills of the Green Mountains, dense and dark. The trees leaning toward the house as if curious. She stopped at the edge where Alina Weiss' shoes had been found. The ground was soft, spongy underfoot. She looked down and saw a patch of earth that looked freshly turned, darker than the surrounding soil, as if something had recently been buried there. She knelt and pressed her palm against it. The ground was warm, not sun-warm, but a deeper heat, like the side of a ceramic mug filled with hot tea. She pulled her hand away and saw that her palm was covered in the same dark dirt from her fingernails the first night. She wiped it on her jeans and stood up. The trees at the forest's edge seemed closer now than they had been a minute ago. She watched them for a long moment, but nothing moved. She walked back inside and locked the door behind her. That night, Nora avoided the master bedroom. She set up a sleeping bag in the living room, directly beneath the largest window, hoping the moonlight would keep her grounded. She placed the Polaroid photo on the coffee table, face down. She couldn't explain why, but she didn't want to look at it again. She fell into a shallow sleep, the kind where you're still aware of every sound. At some point, she heard the scraping again, but this time it was closer. It was coming from the hallway. She opened her eyes. The living room was bathed in pale blue light from the moon. The hallway mirror caught her attention. In the reflection, she could see herself lying on the floor, but behind her, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure. It was too dark to make out details, but she could see its outline, tall and thin, with its head tilted at an unnatural angle. She didn't move. The figure didn't move. Then, in the mirror, the figure raised one hand and pointed directly at her. Nora closed her eyes and did not open them again until morning. When she looked at the mirror, it showed only an empty hallway, but the Polaroid on the coffee table was now face up. The woman was back on the porch, and she was holding something in her hand that looked like a pair of shoes. On the fifth day, Nora found the journal. She had been pulling up a section of loose baseboard in the kitchen, hoping to find the source of a draft, when her fingers brushed against something leather. She worked it free and pulled out a small book bound in dark brown leather, the pages swollen with moisture. The handwriting inside was cramped, frantic, the ink bleeding in places. The first entry was dated October 12, 1957. It was written by Alina Weiss. The journal documented her growing belief that the house was not empty when she moved in. She wrote about a presence in the walls, something that watched her from the basement stairwell, something that whispered to her children at night. She wrote about the soil in the garden, how it seemed to breathe, how it pulled at her feet when she walked across it. The final entry, dated 2 days before her disappearance, was only 3 sentences long. It wants me to go into the garden. It says I left something there. I don't remember planting anything. Nora closed the journal. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the back door, which led to the garden, and saw that the handle was slowly turning. No one was standing there. The handle turned fully, stopped, and then turned back. The lock clicked, and then the door swung open. Nora stepped away from the door. She didn't go toward it. She walked backwards until her back hit the counter, and she watched the open doorway like it was a mouth about to speak. The garden was black outside. No stars visible, no wind. The smell rolled in, thick and organic, filling the kitchen in seconds. She grabbed the door and slammed it shut, twisting the deadbolt. She stood there, breathing hard, her forehead pressed against the cool wood. Then she heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, coming from the other side of the door. She didn't answer. She didn't move. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the frame. She looked through the small window set into the door. The garden was empty, but the grass had been disturbed. A trail of flattened blades led from the edge of the woods to the door, as if something had walked there, something heavy, something with purpose. She backed away from the door and went upstairs. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the corner of the bedroom with the lights on, listening to the house breathe around her. Think about this if you found a photograph of yourself in a house you just moved into, taken decades before you were born. What would you do? Would you stay? Would you sleep? The next morning, Nora made a decision. She needed to see the basement. The realtor had warned her away, and that alone was enough to make her suspicious. She found the door at the end of the hallway, tucked behind a coat rack. The lock was old, rusted, but it gave way when she pushed. The door swung open onto a narrow set of wooden stairs, descending into dark. The smell hit her immediately. It was the same smell from the garden, but but concentrated, almost solid. She grabbed the flashlight from her bag and aimed it down. The beam caught the bottom of the stairs, where the floor was made of packed earth. She took a step down. The wood groaned beneath her. She took another step. Behind her, she heard the door click shut. She spun around. The door was closed, but no one was there. She reached for the handle and pulled. It didn't move. She pulled harder. It stayed locked from the other side. She was trapped. She turned back to face the basement. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, and then steadied. The darkness at the bottom of the stairs seemed to shift, as if something was rising to meet her. She stood there for a long moment. Then she heard it. A voice coming from below. The voice was indistinct, but it had a rhythm, like someone reciting something. Nora held the flashlight steady and forced herself to descend the remaining stairs. The basement was larger than she expected, extending far beyond the footprint of the house above. The walls were fieldstone, rough and ancient, and the floor was pure packed dirt. In the center of the room, there was a well. A stone rim rose about 3 feet from the ground, and the opening was dark. Thank you for spending part of your night with us. If you enjoyed the story, we'd appreciate a comment, a like, and a subscription to the channel. And please share this video with your friends who enjoy calm horror and rain sounds. Rest well and good night.